After years and years of trying to get by with cheap imitations, I finally spent the money and got a well-used but still in good condition, genuine USGI Lensatic compass, and I'm happy with it. Not that there was anything particularly wrong with the cheap copies of it, but they're cheap, and this one I can already tell just from the little bit I've handled it and taken a few test bearings with it that it works a lot better. This is one of the compasses that has the tritium, the glow-in-the-dark element, and tritium has a 10 to 12 year lifespan, so there is still a little bit of glow on this. It's very faint, almost unusable, but that reminds me of the compasses we had in Okinawa in the early 80s in the northern training area, so that's nothing new. One thing that I don't remember on the old ones that we used back then, and maybe they didn't have them or maybe I just forgot about them, but there's this little kind of rectangle you can see. That is a glow-in-the-dark element, and that illuminates the numbers underneath the index line there. Again, I don't remember ever seeing that in the old ones we had back then, so maybe it's a new feature. Question for the viewers here. This is the symbol for tritium. Last night I was fooling around with the compass in the dark, and when I held it under a light, the tritium glowed brighter after that. So does tritium do that? I didn't think it did. So maybe somebody has changed it out for the fluorescent or the phosphorescent, whatever the glow-in-the-dark stuff is. Maybe somebody's changed that out, or does tritium actually do that? Here's a selection of my handheld compasses, starting with the USGI Lensatic compass on the left. The rest of those, as you can see, I've got several copies of the Lensatic compass, and I've used all of them. These other two were an effort to try something different. This is actually my oldest compass. I've had that going on 35 years now, and I know it has a couple of degrees of error, but it works well enough for a cheap imitation of the USGI compass. This is probably the worst one. The needle just doesn't settle down. It takes forever. It's very maddening and frustrating, and it sticks, so I just don't use this anymore. This is a no-name compass because I haven't found a manufacturer's name on it, but it's in a Coughlin pouch, so I assume it was made for them, unless I just got the pouches switched up. This is a Brunton mirror compass, and I bought that because they have a really good reputation. I don't really like it, and I'll explain why in a little bit. The ergonomics of the USGI Lensatic compass work really well for me. It's the compass that I learned land navigation on, and so I'm very familiar and comfortable with the procedures, and I've just stuck with it over the years. This is just much easier for me to hold and to use. Some people really like the Lensatic compass, and some people really dislike it, and I think it just comes down to your personal preferences and what you are used to. This is the Brunton mirror compass, and it's a good compass. It's pretty precise, but I don't really care for it as much as the Lensatic one. Again, I think a lot of it has to do with me being more used to the Lensatic compass, and I think this is a better compass for plotting on a map with. But for use out in the field, I find it pretty cumbersome and time consuming, and there's just too much stuff that I don't like about it. The Lensatic compass works a lot better for me in those circumstances. Even with reading glasses, it's very difficult for my eyes to focus this close. One of the reasons this type of compass is held in such high regard is that you don't need a protractor with it. It's made out of clear plastic, and so you can just lay it right on the map and see through it, and that will help you plot bearings to or from objects on the map. This compass has a built-in mechanism for correcting for declination. One of the criticisms of this compass that people have is that it doesn't have a mechanism for compensating for declination, but I would say that this movable mark on the bezel ring could do just that. Now each click is 3 degrees, So it's not going to be as exact as some of them, but in general, I think you could get something that would work well enough. The USGI compass is made out of aluminum, so you can't see through it, but it's not impossible to set it on a map and use the straight edge to draw a bearing with. Now, it's true that the USGI compass works well with a protractor, but you don't absolutely have to have one. I use one. Again, I'm used to the procedure, I'm comfortable with it, but you don't have to have one. It will work without it.
I've heard some people say that they wouldn't trust their life to anything but the USGI Lensatic compass because it has only about a 3-degree error in it. I've heard other people say that the best you can hope for is about 2¼ degrees of error, and that's not good enough for them. Kind of funny to me because some of my compasses have 3 and 4 and 5 degrees of error, and I've always managed to get where I wanted to go even with them. Here's a little plot that I did on a map that shows you just how far off you might be if you had just a 3-degree error in your bearing.
We'll start out following a compass bearing here, and we'll follow that dark line for approximately 4 miles. This is Arches National Park, by the way. But in reality, we have 3 degrees of error, so we're actually on that lighter line to the left. And we get to our destination approximately 4 miles later. We will be less than a 1/4 mile away from our destination. And again, that's after 4 miles on foot without making any corrections. So is that something that you normally do? So being off by 2 or 3 degrees is not the end of the world, especially if you know the amount of error and it's consistent. Then you just take that into account when you're doing your figuring, and it shouldn't be an issue. The rate of error is approximately 1 in 60, meaning that for every 60 miles you travel, you will be 1 mile off course for every degree off course. When it comes to actually doing navigation in the field, I found that I don't follow bearings for very far anyways. Usually I'm following trails, and once the trails run out, I'm using the lay of the land, the geography, and the distance just to get to a general area. When we stop for the night, we get up the compasses and we shoot some distant landmarks, and we use them to figure out where we are, so that 30 years later we can point to it on the map and say, I slept there one night. There too. I've never dropped a compass on the ground. I've always had the lanyards attached to me some way, so that's not really an issue, but I don't know, which one of these do you think would be the most rugged one to survive such an event?